Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 266, Mother of All Battles. The episode begins with Ash and the gang continuing towards the Pokemon Preservation Area on Mount Silver so they can return Larvitar to its home. They were almost there, finally, making Ash excited because after he dropped off Larvitar, he would be just a day's walk away from the Johto League. As for Brock, he was getting tired of walking and suggested that Ash and the gang take a rest, which Ash and the gang agreed to, especially since Brock was actually doing the heavy lifting this time, carrying around Larvitar, not Ash. Misty and Ash noticed this, with Misty impressed by Larvitar's improved confidence and his new love towards any nice human, as Larvitar appeared to be very happy being carried in Brock's arms. And although Brock was tired from carrying Larvitar, he was happy to have Larvitar in his arms as well, since it meant that he was one step closer to being a master Pokemon breeder with a lot of Pokemon respecting him. Misty then remembered the first time she met Larvitar and many of their attempts to talk afterwards, which had ended with Larvitar using Harden, being terrified of Misty, and she was proud of Larvitar for not being scared of her anymore. Ash and the gang then continued on until they reached a rope bridge that was very high up, above a gorge with a lake at the bottom. Because of this, Ash and Misty were hesitant to go across the bridge, being scared, as Ash asked Brock to check his guidebook and see if there was any other way around aside from the bridge. Brock checks his guidebook and unfortunately assures Ash that the bridge was the only way to get across the lake, though tried to cheer Ash and Misty up when he said that going across this bridge should lead them to the Pokemon Preserve. However, he then saw that the bridge actually led to two pathways. One was to the left and the other was to the right. So this made him realize that he didn't actually know which way to go to the Pokemon Preserve, he just knew that they had to cross the bridge. Ash and Misty were still hesitant, especially with this news. However, Larvitar was not, as he happily jumped out of Brock's arms and ran across the bridge, forcing Ash and the gang to follow, both so that they didn't lose Larvitar, and because Ash and the gang were now confident that the bridge would actually lead them to the Preserve, since they figured that Larvitar may be able to know where its birthplace was if it had any of those memories from being an egg. While Ash and the gang followed Larvitar across the bridge, something was spying on Ash and the gang, unbeknownst to them, from the water below the bridge, being a periscope with a camera. Anyways, it watched as Ash and the gang crossed the bridge with Larvitar happier than usual, as it guides everyone through the forest, implying that it did in fact know where the preservation area was. The periscope then rose up from the water, revealing that the periscope was attached to a whole mech. And this mech then drove itself into the bushes that Ash and the gang were passing by, as the three men inside the mech spied on Ash and the gang still, wanting to get a closer look, so they came out of the water. Much like Team Rocket would, these three men decided that they wanted to steal Larvitar, Pikachu, and Togepi, although particularly Larvitar. These three men looked oddly familiar, almost like they were in last episode. The three men then proceeded to make fun of each other, for one of them having a face that kind of looked like a Meowth, the other one for being short, and the other one for wearing a goddamn beret, one of the ugliest hats of all time. Back with Ash and the gang, while they were still walking with Larvitar, they stopped walking after they heard some loud noises. The noises continued, revealing it themselves to be growls, and they proceeded to get louder and louder, indicating that the source of the growling was getting closer, and this was only further proved as the ground began to shake, the shaking not letting up, causing Ash and the gang to get extremely worried, wondering what was going on, as just then, much to their shock, a huge Pokemon appeared in front of them, one that Ash had never seen before. At least in person, because this Pokemon was none other than Tyranitar, which Ash used his Pokedex on, since he didn't know much about it, obviously. Much to Ash and the gang's surprise, despite the growling and the stomping, Tyranitar didn't seem that angry, as it just stood there, leaving Ash and the gang confused, as they expected that the Tyranitar would have attacked them, obviously. However, Ash and the gang then spotted a potential reasoning for why they weren't being attacked, as they saw a familiar scar on this Tyranitar that Larvitar's mother had gotten from the poachers, and came to the conclusion that this Tyranitar must have been Larvitar's mother, and it was hesitant to attack, since its child was right there. This was proved as the Tyranitar continued to refuse to attack, staring at Larvitar lovingly, leading Ash to tell Larvitar that this was its mother and he should go up to it. Larvitar stood still though, likely in shock, leading Ash to literally push it forward to go to the Tyranitar, which made the Tyranitar angry, thinking that Ash was trying to hurt Larvitar, so it fired a Hyper Beam. Though Ash and the gang were quickly able to dodge as they began running away, but as they ran, they tried to convince Tyranitar that they weren't trying to harm the Larvitar, after Brock suggested that Tyranitar probably thought that they were the original poachers that had stolen Larvitar's egg before, since the poachers may have been masked and not fully revealed themselves, or Larvitar may have only seen the poacher's mech, not the actual poachers themselves. This leads Ash and Misty to try to explain to the Tyranitar that they weren't going to harm Larvitar once again, and try to explain that they were actually trying to take it back to her, but Tyranitar didn't believe them and proceeded to fire another Hyper Beam, leading Ash and the gang to run away, to get away from this one, as they couldn't just dodge it. However, the Tyranitar gave chase, along with Larvitar as well, running with Ash and the gang, crying, since even it was scared of its mother, worried that its mother was purposely trying to hit it, as Larvitar almost got hit by the first Hyper Beam. Also probably crying because it was scared of the fact that he had managed to actually find his mother, and his mother didn't even want it. Ash was surprised to see the crying Larvitar following them, as he had deliberately left Larvitar behind, thinking that Tyranitar would stop attacking them if it saw that its Larvitar was safe. Ash tried to tell the Larvitar this, telling it to stay back with its mother, but Larvitar refused. Even when Ash tried to convince Larvitar to stay back by explaining that if Larvitar stayed back, then Tyranitar would stop attacking, as Larvitar grabbed Pikachu's tail, so that when Pikachu ran, it would drag Larvitar with it. This obviously frustrated Ash, but he realized that he had no choice but to let Larvitar run with them, and while they were running, the three men from earlier were spying from their mech. Having spotted the Tyranitar, now declaring their want for it as opposed to any of the other Pokemon they were going to capture, as they tried their best to keep their mech focused on it, even as Tyranitar was running. Anyways, Ash and the gang was still running as well, as the Tyranitar went to go shoot yet another Hyper Beam at them, although thankfully it missed, allowing Ash to tell Larvitar to make itself useful and try and tell Tyranitar that they were actually Larvitar's friends and weren't trying to hurt it. But before Larvitar could be of any help, Tyranitar shot yet another Hyper Beam, and since Ash was distracted by Larvitar, he couldn't dodge this one, and nor did Misty and Brock, not receiving his warnings, so Ash and the gang were knocked down. Ash tried to get up and run when Larvitar jumped into his arms to join him, although this startled Ash, so he proceeded to instantly drop Larvitar as he landed right at his mother's feet. Everyone freaked out, including Larvitar, as they knew that Tyranitar could now attack them at any moment, since Ash was distracted from dropping Larvitar. But Tyranitar didn't attack, as it instead looked curiously at Larvitar, implying that this whole time it didn't actually realize that Larvitar was its son. Upon seeing the Tyranitar stare at it, Larvitar thought that this meant Tyranitar was going to attack it, so it let out a screech in fear, just like before, with the screech seemingly having some words in it, as Larvitar had seemingly managed to convince the Tyranitar that it was in fact his mother. This led the Tyranitar to realize why it had been staring at Larvitar curiously, because it had in fact recognized it, and it was its mother, and it emotionally smiled and started crying, very happy to see that its child was safe, as it hadn't saw it since it was an egg. The Tyranitar then apologizes to Ash and the gang and its son, making Larvitar glad that its mother had finally realized that it was its son, so now it wasn't scared at all to go up to his mother like it was before, since he knew that his mother wouldn't attack it, as Larvitar and Tyranitar embraced. This happy moment was then interrupted, though, as the three familiar-looking men from earlier were still spying on the Tyranitar and had locked onto it with their mech, leading one of the men, Brago, to order another one of the men, Chico, to fire what they called a giant Pokebag from their mech, which wrapped around Tyranitar and caused her to fall to the ground, capturing her inside. Tyranitar was caught off guard by this, as it was initially a missile that was firing at it, but then the missile turned into the Pokebag, although thankfully Tyranitar was able to push Larvitar away before the bag landed on her. Ash and the gang obviously wondered what the fuck was going on, when suddenly the three men revealed themselves, emerging from their mech as it rode out onto the road, coming out from the bushes. Tyranitar tried to bite open the bag, but it couldn't, as there was a part of a bag that was overlapping its mouth, so it couldn't bite through it. This caused the three men to laugh, pleased with themselves that they had been able to trap a Tyranitar of all Pokemon and prevented it from escaping, as they then revealed themselves, doing a motto similar to Team Rocket's, as Ash and the gang recognized the three men as the poachers from Larvitar's dream. Yes, that's right, that's why they seem super familiar. Anyways, the three poachers did their motto and revealed themselves as Brago, the one with the beret, who was the leader and always spoke in rhymes and quotes, Chico, the inventor for the group, and Blurt, who called himself the strong and silent type, who always breaks things and talks a lot, stating that they were known as the Pokemon Poacher Brothers. As Ash and gang expressed their disgust at the poachers for trying to capture the Larvitar's mother, just as they had tried to capture Larvitar, and they had also previously hurt Larvitar's mother, it was revealed that Team Rocket had been watching this entire exchange from their Meowth balloon with some binoculars. Upon hearing that the Poacher Brothers were poachers, Team Rocket began viewing the poachers as their rivals, stating that they essentially did the exact same thing as them, which was steal Pokemon, only poachers were more inclined to steal wild Pokemon as opposed to Pokemon from trainers. And Jesse then stated that that was the only real difference between the poachers and Team Rocket, since the poachers seemed to do a motto just like Team Rocket did, and Team Rocket didn't like this, as they thought they were the only ones with a motto. Also, Butch and Cassidy did as well, but regardless, they were angry and thought that only they should have a goddamn motto. However, despite Jesse still maintaining the belief that there was no difference between Team Rocket and the poachers, James eventually convinced himself that the poachers were better, since the poachers actually had good equipment, such as their mech, and they could actually make good rhymes in their mottos, especially since they had a leader that was entirely dedicated to rhymes. Jesse tried to rebut that she could make awesome rhymes as well, but James thought that it was a terrible rhyme, and only furthered his point. Jesse was still in denial that the poachers could make better rhymes, but she did admit that the poachers had some pretty good equipment, such as their mech, and suggested that Team Rocket try and steal the mech so they could use it on Ash and the gang, though she didn't know how. So James suggested that they give them a huge meat lover's meal to try and convince them, but Meowth and Jesse simply replied with silence, thinking this idea was stupid as hell. Jesse quickly had to deal with Wobbuffet as it forcibly popped out of its Pokeball, but before she could recall it, she then came up with a plan of her own, a new one, which was that they should simply tell the poachers that they wanted to join them, explaining that they stole Pokemon as well, hoping that the poachers would accept, and then Team Rocket could betray the poachers and steal all of the wild Pokemon that the poachers had worked hard to catch. James and Meowth were intrigued by this idea, so it was officially Team Rocket's newest plan. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang and the Poacher Brothers, upon hearing that Tyranitar and Larvitar were the ones that they had attacked earlier, the leader Brago was extremely pleasantly surprised, and thanked Ash for returning Larvitar to them as they had lost it, as they evil laughed. Ash obviously retorted that these fucking poachers couldn't have Larvitar, but the poachers didn't listen as they launched another Pokebag at Larvitar, which started out as a missile again. capture it, but Ash meant what he said, as he jumped in the way of the Pokebag, getting caught instead. He initially planned to just jump in front of Larvitar and deflect the bag, but he wasn't really opposed to this either, as long as Larvitar was safe. However, Larvitar was not safe, though, as the poachers simply went to go fire another missile from their mech to turn it into another Pokebag to capture Larvitar. But before they could fire it, the poachers then heard sirens in the distance, and recognized the sirens from when the Preservation Rangers had stopped them from getting away with Larvitar before. Not wanting to get caught by the Preservation Rangers again, the poachers declared that Tyranitar was good enough, and simply ran away back toward their mech, hopping into it and driving away, as the mech also towed away Tyranitar still in the Pokebag. The poachers were going extremely fast in their mech, but Brock thought of a way that Ash and the gang could keep up with the poachers, as he sent out his Crobat and instructed it to follow them to wherever they were heading, so that Crobat could report back. And that way, Ash and the gang would know where to go and would be able to catch the poachers off guard instead of wasting their time chasing them aimlessly, since they were too fast. As Crobat flew off, just then, a woman in a formal orange uniform, implying that she was perhaps one of the Preservation Rangers that the poachers were afraid of, arrived on her motorcycle with her Croconaut and asks if everything was okay, explaining that she figured something might have gone wrong since she heard shaking earlier, not knowing that the poachers had just escaped. Misty tried to explain to her about the Tyranitar and how poachers had captured it, but Brock interrupted her first, running up to the ranger and lying that everything was okay now since he was able to see her beauty, as he continued to flirt with her. Although he soon couldn't contain himself with all the flirting, to the point where he had to take breaks in his flirting because he was hyperventilating with excitement. During one of these breaks, the Preservation Ranger finally got the chance to introduce herself, explaining that her name was Mason, and that she was indeed a ranger of the Pokemon Preserve on Mount Silver. Misty then uses one of Brock's breaks to her advantage, as she finally explains what had happened with the Tyranitar and the poachers, leading Ranger Mason to admit that the poachers had been bothering the area for quite some time, going back to, of course, when Larvitar was just an egg, and even before that. This leads Misty to explain that their Larvitar was the one that the poachers initially captured in its egg, leading Ranger Mason to realize that the poachers now wanted to recapture it. Brock assures Ranger Mason that the poachers would be no problem, as he had sent his Crobat to follow them to wherever they were going, hoping that this would impress Ranger Mason. However, Ranger Mason was instead just creeped out by how obsessed Brock was with her, as she directed her attention to something else, noticing Pikachu poking and prodding on the bag that held Ash inside still, wanting Ash out of there. Ash, of course, wanted himself out as well, and he wanted Pikachu to stop poking him, so he yelled out, and this made Ranger Mason realized that Ash was inside the bag, as she sent out her Croconaut and had it use its strong figure to free Ash from the bag, much to his delight. As soon as Ash was free, he questioned what Ash and the gang and Ranger Mason were going to do, even if Crobat came back with the poachers' location, wondering how they could convince the poachers to hand over Tyranitar and give up on recapturing Larvitar. Misty suggests that if the poachers were so scared by even one Preservation Ranger showing up, then they would likely be scared by the whole force. So she was suggesting that Ranger Mason go get the entire Pokemon Preservation squad, and they all try and corner the poachers. However, Mason informs Ash and the gang that the rest of the group was too far away, as Ash and the gang had actually went the wrong way, and were not that close to the preserve, since there was apparently another way to get to the preserve that was way faster, that didn't even involve crossing the bridge. Ash and the gang questioned how Brock could have fucked this up, leading Brock to admit that he was probably just tired since he was resting when he read his guidebook, so he didn't see the other way to get to the preserve. This led Ash to suggest that they simply try and convince the poachers to give up on Larvitar and give back Tyranitar by offering them a good meal, but no one else liked this idea, as they simply replied with silence. This led Ash to give up on suggesting ideas, as he directed his attention on Larvitar to see how he was doing, only to see that Larvitar looked pretty sad. Knowing that Larvitar was sad because of his mother being captured, despite him just reuniting with it, Ash reassured Larvitar that he shouldn't waste his time being sad, because Ash knew that they would get Tyranitar back immediately. Although Ash was of course doubting this, he didn't want to express his doubt to Larvitar. Being a Preservation Ranger, and therefore being used to having Larvitar as an egg over at the preservation area, Mason thought that taking care of Larvitar was partially her responsibility, so she crouched down to it to assure Larvitar that it would get to see its mother again as well, but Larvitar was startled by this. Mason questioned why this was, and Ash and the gang admitted that they were kind of confused too, as they thought that Larvitar had gotten over its fear of humans, but realized that it would still take Larvitar a while to warm up to humans, even though it had warmed up to Ash, Misty, and Brock, with Brock theorizing that this was because Ash, Misty, and Brock had memories with the Larvitar, and since those negative memories were dealt with, Larvitar now had no reason not to trust Misty and Brock, although he was still skeptical with people it had just met. Meanwhile, while the poachers had retreated to their mech with the Tyranitar to a rocky area, Team Rocket was still spying on them as they proceeded to implement their plan, getting down on their knees, showing up in their Meowth balloon, and getting out and begging to be accepted into the poachers' gang. Explaining their reasoning as that they really wanted to try out the poachers' machine. The poachers didn't seem interested in accepting new members, but then they all began to feel kinks in their necks, and suggested that Team Rocket give them a massage each if they wanted a chance at joining the gang. Team Rocket claimed that they all gave really good massages, as they proceeded to do so. The poachers were impressed that Team Rocket obeyed them so quickly, and decided to let Team Rocket join their gang, under the conditions that Team Rocket would let the poachers use their Meowth balloon if the poachers let them use their machine, and stated that Team Rocket could only use their machine if the poachers allowed them to, as the poachers' leader. Brago then instructed Team Rocket to get into the machine, but only so that they could capture Pikachu and Larvitar for them, using the Pokebags. Team Rocket were hesitant about giving up their balloon, but the poachers assured them that they would only use it when Team Rocket was using their mech. So, Team Rocket, desperate to get a hold of the mech, agreed to this as they technically joined the gang. Crobat was listening to all this and overheard it all as he then flew back to Brock to report. And the others, not being spotted by the poachers or Team Rocket since it was hiding nearby some trees. I'm sure Team Rocket wouldn't even have spotted Crobat even if it did reveal itself though, because they were so excited to be able to use the machine as they jumped into it and began to ride off in it. Unbeknownst to Team Rocket though, Brago had come up with a plan, along with his other two poachers, to simply use Team Rocket as cover. Essentially, he had sent Team Rocket to go distract Ash and the gang and any potential preservation rangers by going to try and kidnap Pikachu and Larvitar, which would allow himself and his two poacher brothers to make their escape with Tyranitar, since Tyranitar was still in the bag next to them. As for the Tyranitar, it struggled in her capture bag, trying to escape the Pokebag, but Chico just laughed, saying that the more Tyranitar would struggle, the tighter the Pokebag would become, and the more impossible it would be for Tyranitar to escape, so Tyranitar was essentially sealing its own fate. Just then, Crobat had managed to find Ash and the gang, and report to them the poacher's location, leaving Ranger Mason feeling like it was her duty to save the Tyranitar, since it was her job to be a ranger, to order the Crobat to take her and Ash and the gang to where the poachers were located, and Crobat did so as they began running to the rocky area where the poachers were at. However, since Team Rocket had left in the mech first, they cut Ash and the gang off by zooming down a nearby rocky hill. Ash and the gang obviously saw Team Rocket in the poachers' machine and questioned how they got it, leading Team Rocket to claim that they had teamed up with the poachers, and proceeded to do their motto, stating their plan to capture Larvitar and Pikachu as they then fire out a Pokebag, using a remote to do so that Shinko had given Jessie. However, Pikachu and Croconaw were able to deflect the Pokebag from landing on Larvitar, Pikachu, or Croconaw, which Team Rocket also decided they wanted to capture by using Thunderbolt and Hydro Pump, which absolutely decimated the bag, sending the remains of the bag back at Team Rocket, as that combined with the Hydro Pump and Thunderbolt were enough to send Team Rocket blasting off, although the mech was unharmed since Team Rocket had jumped out of it. This was much to the poachers' delight, as, just as they had said, they had decided to use Team Rocket's Meowth balloon, having Tyranitar hang from the bottom of the Meowth balloon in its Pokebag, while Team Rocket was in the mech, and they had been watching the whole ordeal from up in the sky, with Ash and the gang not noticing them because they were too busy dealing with Team Rocket. The poachers initially planned to just make their escape in the Meowth balloon. However, upon noticing Ash and the gang, they thought that they could easily capture Pikachu, Croconaw, and Larvitar, not believing Pikachu and Croconaw to be able to withstand their wits, especially Chico's, as Chico then used a remote control to control the mech, since Team Rocket was no longer inside of it, allowing the mech to charge towards Ash and the gang, much to their surprise, as they questioned how it was moving, as they then directed their attention up to the poachers in the Meowth balloon. Just then, though, the mech then extended out claws to grab Ash's Pikachu and Ranger Mason's Croconaw, with Ash and the gang unable to do anything because they were so shocked. To make sure that Ash and the gang couldn't do anything, though, and try and stop their mech from delivering Pikachu and Croconaw to them, Chico then fired a Pokebag from the Meowth balloon, which deployed from the mech, and captured Ash and the gang, Mason, but not Larvitar, as it managed to dodge out of the way, although Larvitar was shocked at being the only one that wasn't captured, and was stunned as a result, not sure what to do. This led Ash to take charge, not wanting anything to happen to Larvitar, as it told it that it was now up to Larvitar to save Tyranitar, and instructs that it should use its powers to do so, and all of its good attacks. Larvitar realized what Ash meant, because if it could stop the poachers, then it could free Ash and the gang, as well as Mason and its mother Tyranitar, since Tyranitar was attached to the bottom of the Meowth balloon in its Pokebag. So Larvitar started off by shouting with its good old screech attack. Ash thought that this was definitely a good idea, and informed Larvitar that not only would this distract the poachers, forcing them to cover their ears, but it would also likely get the Tyranitar's attention, since it would recognize Larvitar's screeching. Since even though Tyranitar was super low on energy due to being captured, and even though it also couldn't see anything due to being stuck in the bag, it would definitely recognize its child's voice, and that could motivate Tyranitar to try and escape the bag. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened, as when Larvitar screeched, it not only caused the poachers to plug their ears in pain, but Tyranitar became desperate to get out of the bag, thrashing around, knowing that its Larvitar was nearby, and not wanting the poachers, who it also knew were nearby, to capture it, not knowing that the poachers were currently covering their ears. So, she shakes the bag so hard that it causes the Meowth balloon to shake, although she still couldn't escape the bag, so she resorted to using Hyper Beam, although they were small, since she could barely open her mouth, but the Hyper Beams were enough to slowly damage the Pokebag, much to Ash and the gang's delight, as Tyranitar was about to escape the bag. However, Larvitar's screech had ended by this point, allowing the poachers to stop covering their ears, and Chico to press a button on a remote that was connected to Tyranitar's Pokebag, sending a shock through it to stop Tyranitar from escaping, and electrocuting it obviously. Ash and the gang, still inside their own Pokebag, thought that the only way to free Tyranitar at this point would be to stop the electricity by getting a hold of Chico's remote somehow. But Tyranitar was so desperate to save Larvitar from danger that it was able to fight through the pain of the electricity and continue to try and break free from the bag by using more Hyper Beams. Since Tyranitar's mouth was still trapped, the Hyper Beams still weren't super strong, but they were strong enough to destroy the mouth trap, which allowed Tyranitar to move its mouth up a little bit so that it wasn't so cramped, so she could get out a full-on Hyper Beam and launch it out of the bag straight at the Meowth balloon, which destroyed the Meowth balloon, sending it plummeting down, as it also detached Tyranitar's bag from it, sending Tyranitar plummeting down as well. During the chaos of the balloon exploding when it landed on the ground, with the poachers still inside, Chico dropped the remote that controlled the mech from high up, causing it to break into a million pieces when it hit the ground, meaning that Chico couldn't control the mech anymore. And also, breaking any remaining restraints on both Ash and the gang and Mason's bag and Tyranitar's bag, as the remote control was linked to the bags as well. So this allowed Ash and the gang and Tyranitar to free themselves fully from the bags. Anyways, Tyranitar didn't land anywhere near the poachers and the crashed Meowth balloon, so this allowed Larvitar to run up to its mother, gratefully reuniting with it, thinking that the poachers wouldn't be a problem. However, as soon as Ash and the gang joined up with Larvitar and Tyranitar, the injured poachers didn't give up yet, as they got out of the wreckage of the Meowth balloon and jumped into their mech, piloting it, since as long as they were in it, they didn't need the remote to. As they then made their way down from the cliff that the Meowth balloon had landed on, and went over to corner Ash and the gang, Larvitar and Tyranitar, wanting all the Pokemon. However, as the mech was about to run over Ash and the gang to kill them and then take all the Pokemon, Ash told Larvitar to take action and use Hidden Power to take them out. So Larvitar began charging up for a Hidden Power, and Tyranitar, of course, wanted to help his child, so it charged up for a Hyper Beam, leading Tyranitar and Larvitar to do a dual attack, working together to explode the poacher's machine, leaving only one metal plate, which the poachers were sitting on, remaining, but even that breaks to pieces, leaving the poachers with nothing to sit on. With the mech destroyed, this also meant that the claws holding Pikachu and Crocodile were destroyed, which sent them flying. Though Ash was easily able to catch Pikachu, and Mason went to go catch her Crocodile, but Brock jumped in the way, stopping her, wanting to catch Crocodile for her, so that he could impress her. However, Brock failed to fully catch Crocodile, as Crocodile simply used Brock's body as a cushion to soften its fall, knocking Brock out momentarily. Larvitar and Tyranitar were very impressed with each other's attacks, and Larvitar was very hyped to finally be back with its mother as it jumped up to it and hugged it, with Tyranitar obviously hugging its child back. Yay, they were reunited! This wasn't the only happy thing that happened, as the poachers were then tied up in some rope, being forced to sit together, as they were tied up by not only Mason, but all of the other preservation rangers who Mason had finally decided to call, despite the long time it would take them to get here, as she really wanted all of the rangers to thank Ash and the gang for their help, as they all did, along with Mason revealing herself as the leader of the preservation rangers. Ash claims that Hero's friends didn't deserve any of the credit, and Larvitar deserved it all, leading Mason to crouch down and thank it. And this time, Larvitar didn't seem afraid and smiled back in appreciation for the thanks, with Mason declaring that Larvitar has clearly gained more confidence around humans, with Ash adding that Larvitar must have also saw that Mason was a genuinely good human being. And now that Larvitar was comfortable with the rangers in the preservation area, Larvitar was definitely going to stay with Tyranitar there, therefore leaving Ash and the gang's party. Ash was sad about this, but he knew that Larvitar was never meant to stay with him forever. Brock seemingly didn't care about what was happening to Larvitar, as he stated that Larvitar wasn't the only one who developed more confidence, as he had as well, stating that he now had more balls, and he proceeded to grab a hold of Mason's hands, essentially trying to force his flirts on her, leaving Misty to drag him off as usual, apologizing to Mason for Brock's sexual harassment-esque behavior. Anyways, as thanks for permitting Larvitar and Tyranitar to stay at the preservation area, Mason revealed that she obviously knew of the upcoming Silver Conference, as it was also on Mount Silver, and she gave Ash and the gang some pointers for how to do well against strong trainers in the Silver Conference, although they were pretty fucking vague, but she thankfully gave less vague directions to Silvertown, the site of the Silver Conference, instructing Ash and the gang to follow the nearby river to the road, which will get them directly to Silvertown. With that, Ash and the gang leave the preservation area to go to Silvertown, saying goodbye to Mason and her Crocodile, but just as they were leaving, Larvitar and Tyranitar pop out of some nearby trees, with Larvitar getting Ash's attention by calling out to him, and once Ash noticed Tyranitar and Larvitar, he saw that they were waving goodbye to Ash and the gang as well, so they waved back and officially set off to Silvertown. Ash would miss Larvitar, but he was happy to see that it was back with its mother where it belonged, in a safe place, far away from the poachers and Team Rocket. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, it was now nighttime, and they had been blasted off, somehow getting trapped in the remains of the bag, as the bag also somehow got caught on the end of the rope bridge from earlier, on the bottom of it. So Team Rocket were forced to simply just stay in the bag, huddled together in the cold night, attached to the bottom of the bridge. They tried to get out of the bag, but it was useless. At least until next episode. I mean, they have to come back every episode. It's status quo.